A Werewolf Shifter Romance, written by Amelia Hart. Chapter 1. Chains and Stone. Elira had been scrubbing floors for 4 years when they came to take her to die. She recognized the sound of their boots before they reached the servants' quarters. Heavy, deliberate footfalls that echoed through the stone corridors of Castle Thornhaven with the weight of inevitability. Every servant in the cramped room went still, heads bowed, breaths held, waiting to see who would be chosen. The door slammed open. 3 guards in the dark crimson livery of the council filled the doorway, their expressions carved from the same cold stone as the castle walls. "The Omega called Elira," the lead guard announced, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. "You are summoned for the ritual of the rejected." Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward her. Some held pity. Most held relief that it wasn't them. Elira set down her scrub brush with hands that only trembled slightly and rose to her feet. She'd known this day would come eventually. Defective Omegas didn't last long in the council's service before they were sent to the tomb. "Come willingly or be dragged," the guard said. "Your choice." Elira lifted her chin. If she was going to die, she would at least die with what little dignity she had left. "I'll walk." They shackled her wrists anyway. The iron was cold and heavy, the chains clinking with each step as they led her from the only shelter she'd known for the past 4 years. Not that it had been much of a shelter, more like a cage with a roof, but it had been better than dying alone in the streets, which had been her only other option after her village had cast her out. The castle corridors blurred past. Servants pressed themselves against walls to let them pass, averting their eyes. Elira didn't blame them. Everyone knew what the ritual meant. Everyone knew that Omegas who touched the sealed tomb didn't come back. They passed through the main hall where the 5 lords of the council sat in their seats of power. Lord Varen, the eldest and most feared, watched her procession with eyes like chips of flint. His silver hair gleamed in the torchlight, and a smile played at the corners of his mouth. He always smiled when someone was being sent to die. "Another defective Omega for the ancestors," he said to the lord beside him, his voice carrying across the hall. "How generous we are to honor the old ways." Laughter rippled through the gathered nobles. Elira kept her head high and her eyes forward. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Outside, rain fell in sheets. The spring storms had come early this year, turning the roads to mud and the forbidden forest into a treacherous maze of sodden earth and swollen streams. The guards threw a rough cloak over her shoulders, but it did little to keep out the cold. They weren't concerned with her comfort. They just needed her alive long enough to reach the tomb. A covered wagon waited in the courtyard, its interior dark and windowless. They shoved her inside and slammed the door. Elira heard the lock click, sealing her in darkness. The wagon lurched forward, and her journey to death began. 3 days. That's how long it took to reach the forbidden forest from the capital. 3 days of rattling through rain and cold, with nothing but stale bread and water shoved through a slot twice daily. 3 days to think about all the ways her life had gone wrong. Elira had been born in a small village 10 days' travel east of Thornhaven. A village so small it didn't even have a proper name. Just a cluster of farms surrounding a central square. Her mother had died when she was young. She barely remembered the woman's face, just the feeling of safety when she'd been held. Her father had been a laborer, working himself to death in the fields to feed a daughter he'd never wanted. When he died during Elira's 14th winter, the village had taken her in out of obligation, not kindness. She'd worked for her keep, cleaning houses and tending animals, waiting for her 16th birthday, when she would finally shift for the first time and become a true member of the pack. 16 came and went. The full moon rose and set. Every other youth her age had transformed, their bones cracking and reshaping, their wolves emerging in howls of triumph and pain. Elira had felt nothing. No pull of the moon, no stirring of a beast within. Just the hollow emptiness of being fundamentally broken. The pack healer had examined her, prodding and poking while the village alpha watched with growing disgust. "No wolf," the healer had finally declared. "Defective." "The moon goddess made a mistake with this one. We can't keep dead weight," the alpha had said, not even bothering to look at Elira directly. "She eats our food but can't hunt, can't fight, can't breed. She's useless to the pack. They'd given her 3 days to leave. 3 days to gather what little she owned and disappear before they threw her out by force. Elira had walked to the capital because she'd had nowhere else to go. At least Thornhaven was large enough that maybe, just maybe, she could find work that didn't require a wolf. The council had been recruiting servants at the time. They'd asked no questions about her lack of a wolf. They'd simply shoved a contract at her, made her mark it with her thumb, and assigned her to the scullery. Only later had she realized why they accepted defective omegas so readily. They needed a steady supply for the ritual. Every year, when spring turned to summer, the council sent wagons into the countryside. They collected omegas who couldn't shift, omegas who'd been rejected by their packs, omegas who had nowhere else to go. They brought them to the capital, gave them just enough food to survive, and worked them until they broke, or until their turn came to be sent to the tomb. Elira had watched 3 omegas leave for the ritual in her 4 years at the castle. None had returned. The guards who accompanied them came back silent and grim, and within days, a new defective omega would appear in the servants' quarters to take the dead one's place. Now it was her turn. The wagon finally stopped on the afternoon of the 3rd day. Elira heard voices outside, gruff and impatient. The lock clicked, and the door swung open. Rain poured down, and beyond it, she could see the dark wall of the forbidden forest, rising up against the gray sky. "Out!" one of the guards ordered. Elira climbed down on unsteady legs. 3 days in the wagon had left her stiff and aching. 12 guards surrounded her, all armed with swords and crossbows. Far too many guards for one defenseless omega. The number told her everything she needed to know about what they really expected to happen at the tomb. The forest loomed before them, ancient trees twisted by centuries of growth. No one lived in the forbidden forest. Even wolves avoided it. Stories said it was cursed, that something dark slept beneath its roots. Elira had always thought the stories were just meant to frighten children. Now, looking at the oppressive shadows between the trees, she wasn't so sure. "Move," the lead guard said, shoving her forward. They entered the forest in single file, guards on all sides. The canopy overhead blocked most of the rain, but it also blocked the light. Elira's feet squelched in mud with each step, her chains jangling. No one spoke. The only sounds were the patter of rain on leaves and the occasional crack of a branch beneath a heavy boot. They walked for hours. The forest grew darker and colder. Elira's legs trembled with exhaustion, but whenever she slowed, a guard would shove her forward. They wanted this over with, wanted to complete their duty and return to the comfort of the castle. Finally, as twilight deepened into night, they reached a clearing. Elira stopped, breath catching in her throat. The tomb rose in the center of the clearing, carved from white stone that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. It sat on a raised platform, 7 steps leading up to a sealed entrance. Strange symbols covered the stone, runes that hurt to look at directly. Power radiated from the structure, pressing against Elira's skin like a physical weight. This was no ordinary tomb. This was a prison. A cage built to hold something too dangerous to kill. "Forward," the lead guard commanded, though his voice had gone quieter, more cautious. Elira climbed the steps slowly, each one feeling like it might be her last. At the top, the sealed entrance waited. The stone was perfectly smooth except for a single circular seal in the center, marked with symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when she looked at them directly. The guards had spread out around the base of the platform, weapons drawn. Their formation was defensive, she realized. They weren't just here to make sure she touched the seal. They were here to kill whatever emerged if the tomb opened. "Touch it," the lead guard ordered. "Place your hand on the seal and speak the words of offering." Elira looked at the seal. This close, she could feel the magic emanating from it. Old magic. Dark magic. The kind that demanded payment in blood and bone. 3 omegas before her had touched this seal. 3 omegas had died screaming as the magic ripped them apart, rejecting them as unworthy. She would be the 4th. Just another defective omega ground up and discarded by forces she couldn't understand. At least it would be quick. That's what the servants had whispered. The seal killed fast. One touch, and your heart simply stopped beating. Elira raised her shackled hands toward the stone. Her fingers were inches away when she paused. A thought struck her, sudden and sharp. If she was going to die anyway, why should she give the council what they wanted? Why should she obediently walk to her death like livestock to slaughter? "What are you waiting for?" the guard demanded. "Touch it!" Elira looked back at him, at all 12 guards with their weapons ready. She looked at the tomb, at the prison that had held something for so long that even the council feared what might emerge. Then she looked at her own shackled wrists and thought about 4 years of scrubbing floors, 4 years of beatings and starvation, and being told she was worthless. Maybe the tomb would kill her. Probably it would, but at least she'd die having made a choice of her own. She pressed both palms flat against the seal. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. The clearing was silent except for the patter of rain and the nervous shifting of guards. Elira felt the cold stone beneath her hands, felt the throb of magic just beneath the surface, felt the world exploded in silver light. Chapter 2. Silver and Storm. The silver light wasn't just bright. It was alive. Elira felt it pour through her hands, into her blood, racing through every vein and artery like molten metal. The sensation should have been agony, but instead, it felt like recognition. Like something inside her that had been sleeping for her entire life suddenly opened its eyes and whispered, "Finally." The guards were shouting. She could hear them distantly, their voices distorted and strange. Then came a sound like thunder, except it originated from the tomb itself. A deep resonance that shook the ground beneath her feet and sent cracked spider-webbing through the white stone platform. The seal beneath her palms shattered. Not crumbled or broke, but shattered into 1,000 fragments of light that dissolved into the air like snow melting on warm skin. The force of it threw Elira backward, and she braced for the impact of stone against her spine. It never came. An invisible barrier caught her, suspended her in the air for a heartbeat, before setting her down gently at the top of the steps. The same barrier that had saved her was now exploding outward in all directions. Elira watched as the 12 guards were picked up like leaves in a storm and hurled across the clearing. They crashed into trees with sickening thuds, their armor clanging, weapons scattering across the muddy ground. The tomb doors ground open. Stone scraped against stone, a sound that spoke of centuries of stillness finally broken. Darkness yawned beyond the entrance, so deep and complete that it seemed to swallow the light around it. Then he emerged. Slowly at first, as if even movement required effort. A figure that had to duck to fit through the doorway, broad-shouldered and tall. The pre-dawn light caught him in pieces. First his hand, long fingers with calluses that spoke of sword work. Then his arm, muscular and marked with old scars. His chest, bare except for the remnants of what might have once been fine clothing, now reduced to tatters. And finally, his face. Elira's breath stopped. She'd seen handsome men before. The guards at the castle, the nobles who walked the halls, even some of the merchants in the market square. But this man, this creature who stepped from the tomb with eyes that glowed like molten silver in the dim light, wasn't handsome in any conventional sense. He was terrifying and magnificent. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure black, framing a face that looked carved from granite. High cheekbones, a strong jaw covered in a dark beard, a mouth set in a hard line. A scar ran from his temple to his jaw, old and pale against skin that should have been tanned but had gone colorless from centuries without sun. He stood at least a head taller than the tallest guard, his frame powerful, but with a lean edge that spoke of deprivation. But it was his eyes that held her frozen. They weren't human. They glowed with an inner light, silver gray like storm clouds, and they fixed on Elira with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare, seen in a way she'd never been seen before. Then the bond hit. It slammed into Elira's chest like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. Her knees buckled, and she went down hard on the stone steps, gasping. It felt like drowning and being pulled from deep water simultaneously. Like dying and being born. Like every cell in her body suddenly recognized something it had been searching for without her knowledge and screamed, "There, there, there." The man from the tomb staggered. His glowing eyes went wide, and one hand shot out to brace against the doorframe. He was staring at her with an expression of such raw shock that Elira knew with absolute certainty, that he felt it too. "Impossible," he breathed, and his voice was rough from disuse, scraping like stone on stone. You're... Elira tried to speak, tried to ask what was happening to her, why her chest felt like it was being torn open and stitched back together at the same time, but no words would come. She could only kneel there on the steps, hands pressed to her sternum, feeling something fundamental shift in the architecture of her soul. The man took a step toward her, then another. Each movement was careful, controlled, as if he was fighting against his own body's urge to run to her. He made it 3 steps, before a crossbow bolt whistled through the air where his head had been a moment before. The guards had recovered. "Kill it!" The lead guard's voice cracked with panic as he struggled to his feet, fumbling for his sword. "Kill the creature before it escapes!" More bolts flew. The man moved with speed that shouldn't have been possible for something that had just emerged from a tomb. He dodged the first volley, twisted away from the second, but Elira could see the strain in his movements, could see the way his chest heaved with effort, the tremor in his hands. He was weak. Whatever he was, wherever he'd been, it had cost him dearly. One of the guards charged up the steps with his sword raised. The man caught his wrist mid-swing with one hand, and for a moment they stood frozen, locked together. Then the man's eyes flared brighter, that silver light intensifying until it was almost blinding. "Kneel," he commanded. The word carried weight, not volume, but presence. It pressed down on the clearing like a physical force, and Elira felt it wash over her and past her, directed at the guards below. The man on the steps went rigid, his sword clattering from nerveless fingers. His body folded, knees hitting stone with a crack that made Elira wince. Around the clearing, every other guard did the same. All 12 of them dropped as if their strings had been cut, forced into submission by something far more powerful than physical strength. Their necks bowed, bare and vulnerable. Every instinct they had was screaming submission. The man released the guard on the steps, who collapsed completely, unconscious. Then he turned that terrible, glowing gaze on the others. "How long?" His voice was quieter now, but no less commanding. "How long has the tomb been sealed?" None of the guards answered. They were too busy fighting their own bodies' betrayal, trying and failing to raise their heads against the invisible force holding them down. "Answer me!" The command came out as a roar that echoed off the trees. 200 years! The lead guard gasped out, his face pressed into the mud. 200 years since the seal was placed, my lord. Silence. Complete and utter silence. The man swayed on his feet. Elira watched as the information hit him. Watched something that might have been pain or fury or grief flash across his face. 200 years. He'd been entombed for 2 centuries while the world moved on without him. "Who rules now?" he demanded. "Who sits the throne?" "There is no throne, my lord." The guard's voice shook. "The Council of 5 Lords governs. They have for 200 years. The Council." The man's lip curled. "My cousin's conspirators. They still draw breath." He took a step down the stairs, then another, moving toward the guards with clear intent. But halfway down, his knee buckled. He caught himself on the stone railing, and Elira saw what she'd suspected. He was running on nothing but will and fury. The command he'd used to subdue the guards had cost him dearly. One of the guards saw it too, saw the weakness. His hand moved slowly, carefully, reaching for something at his belt. A signal flare, Elira realized. The kind that would light up the sky and call reinforcements from miles away. "No," Elira found herself saying. The word came out hoarse, her throat tight. "Don't." The guard ignored her. His fingers closed around the flare. The man from the tomb's eyes snapped to the movement. He raised one hand, and power rippled through the air. The guard went rigid, then slumped, unconscious before he could strike the flare. Around the clearing, the other guards followed, dropping one by one like dolls with their strings cut. It was over in seconds. 12 guards lay unconscious in the mud, disarmed and defeated. The man stood alone in the center of the carnage, chest heaving with exertion. The glow in his eyes was dimming, his body trembling with strain. He'd won. but the cost was written in every line of his body. His gaze found Elira again, and something in his expression softened. He climbed back up the steps toward her, each movement deliberate. When he reached the top, he knelt so they were eye to eye. "You touched the seal," he said quietly. "You opened the tomb. Do you know what that means?" Elira shook her head mutely. "It means you're mine." The words should have sounded possessive, threatening. Instead, they came out with something like wonder. "Mine to protect, mine to guard, mine to—" He paused, eyes searching her face. "Cherish. I don't understand," Elira managed. "I'm nobody. I'm defective. I don't even have a wolf." His hand came up slowly, telegraphing the movement, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed her cheek with surprising gentleness. The touch sent sparks racing across her skin, and that feeling in her chest, the bond, flared brighter. "You have me," he said simply. "That's all that matters. Now we need to move. Those guards won't stay unconscious forever, and when they wake, they'll send word to the council. We need to be far from here when that happens." "Move where?" Elira asked. I can't." She couldn't finish. The enormity of what had just happened was crashing down on her. She was alive. The tomb had opened, and she was alive. This man, this impossibly powerful creature, was looking at her like she was something precious, instead of something broken. "With me," he said, and there was no room for argument in his tone. "You're coming with me." He stood, pulling her up with him. Elira's legs were unsteady, and when she swayed, he caught her. For a moment they stood there, his arm around her waist, her hand pressed against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat beneath her palm, strong and steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "What's your name?" she asked. "Kale," he said. "Kale Stormborn. And 200 years ago, I was the Alpha King of these lands." His eyes hardened. "I intend to reclaim what was stolen from me. Starting now." He swept her into his arms before she could protest, carrying her as if she weighed nothing. Then he was moving, running down the steps and into the forest with speed that stole her breath. Trees blurred past, the ground disappearing beneath his feet. But Elira could hear it, the raggedness in his breathing, the slight hitch in his stride. He was pushing himself beyond his limits. "You don't have to carry me," she said. "I can walk." "No," Kyle said shortly. "You can't. Not fast enough. They'll come. We need distance before they regroup." So Elira held on, her arms around his neck, her face pressed against his shoulder. The bond between them hummed with each heartbeat, growing stronger with proximity. She didn't understand it, didn't understand any of this, but as the tomb disappeared behind them and the forest swallowed them whole, one thing became clear. Her old life was over. Whatever came next, whoever this Alpha King truly was, she was bound to him now in ways she couldn't begin to comprehend. And terrifying as that was, it was also the first time in her life she'd ever felt like she might belong somewhere. Chapter 3. Broken Bonds. Kale ran until his legs threatened to buckle beneath him. 5 days of relentless travel through hidden forest paths, over rocky terrain that tore at Elira's thin shoes, through streams swollen with spring rain. He pushed them both to the edge of collapse, driven by the knowledge that the council's hunters would not be far behind. When they finally emerged from the densest part of the forbidden forest, the landscape opened into rolling hills, scarred by time and neglect. Elira saw it first, the skeletal remains of what had once been magnificent. The ruins rose against the gray sky like broken teeth. White stone walls, cracked and moss-covered, jutted from the earth at awkward angles. Towers that had once scraped the clouds now lay toppled, their blocks scattered across overgrown courtyards. Archways led to nowhere. Staircases climbed toward empty air. This had been a castle once, a seat of power that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Now it was a graveyard of stone and memory. "This was yours," Elira said quietly, not quite a question. Kale's jaw clenched. "This was the heart of the kingdom, where my father ruled, and his father before him, going back 1,000 years, until my cousin decided blood meant less than ambition." They picked their way through the debris, Kale's hand steady on Alira's elbow when the ground grew treacherous. The bond between them had grown stronger over the days of travel, a constant hum beneath her skin that made his presence simultaneously comforting and overwhelming. She found herself hyper-aware of every movement he made, every breath, every time his eyes tracked to her face as if to confirm she was still real. As they rounded what had once been the main gate, now just 2 pillars standing sentinel over rubble, a figure stepped from the shadows. Alira tensed, but Kyle's hand on her arm was reassuring rather than restraining. The man who emerged was tall and battle-worn, his silver hair pulled back in a warrior's knot. His armor, though dented and tarnished, still bore the crest of a wolf's head, the same symbol Alira had seen carved into the tomb. His face was weathered like old leather, but his eyes were sharp and clear. They fixed on Kyle with an intensity that made Alira's breath catch. "My king," the man said, and his voice broke on the words. He dropped to one knee amid the rubble, his head bowed. 200 years I have waited. 200 years I stood guard in stone, conscious but unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but watch this place decay. When the seal broke, when I felt the magic release me, I knew you had returned. Kyle crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and hauled the man to his feet. "Dane, commander of my guard. My friend." His voice was rough with emotion. "You've suffered long. Not as long as you, my lord." Dane's eyes, gray as winter storms, finally shifted to Alira. His expression transformed from joy to something more complicated. Confusion, perhaps, and concern. "This is the one who freed you?" "My mate," Kyle said simply. And the possessive pride in his voice sent heat flooding through Alira's cheeks. "Alira, meet Commander Dane, the most loyal wolf ever to draw breath." Dane studied her with an intensity that made Alira want to shrink back. She resisted the urge, lifting her chin instead. Let him see what she was. Let him judge. Everyone else had. "She has no wolf scent," Dane said carefully. "She appears human to my senses. Yet she opened a seal that should have killed any but a true mate." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "There is magic here. Old magic. Dark magic. Explain," Kale commanded, and the word carried the weight of centuries of authority. Dane gestured for them to follow, leading them deeper into the ruins. He brought them to what had once been a great hall, its roof mostly intact despite the passage of time. Someone had made a rough camp here, a bedroll in one corner, supplies stacked neatly against a wall. Dane had been living in these ruins, Alira realized, waiting. When the seal was placed, Dane began, settling onto a chunk of fallen pillar. It was crafted by the council's most powerful sorceress, a woman named Morvenna. She sold her soul to dark powers for the magic needed to bind an Alpha King. The seal had 2 purposes. First, to imprison you until you died, which she believed would take perhaps a decade at most. Second, to ensure that even if you survived, your mate would never be able to free you. Alira felt cold dread pooling in her stomach. How? By making certain any potential mate would die upon touching the seal. The magic was designed to reject all but the one. And should that one ever exist, should your true mate ever be born, the sorceress added a second layer of protection. Dane's eyes locked on Alira. She would be cursed before birth, cursed to never manifest her wolf, cursed to be rejected by her own kind, cursed to be so broken and worthless that she would die long before reaching the tomb. The words hit Alira like physical blows. Everything she'd suffered, the rejection, the years of believing herself defective, all of it had been orchestrated. She'd been targeted before she'd even drawn her first breath. The council hunted Omegas born in the year of the prophecy. Dane continued, his voice heavy. Any female child born to shifter parents, particularly those of Omega lineage, was marked. Many were killed outright. Others were cursed as you were. The council wanted to ensure no mate of yours would ever survive to free you. Kale's hand found Alira's, his fingers intertwining with hers. The bond flared at the touch, warm and grounding. Yet she survived. She reached the tomb. She freed me, which means the curse was not complete. Dane said. Or perhaps it was never meant to be. The sorceress who cast it died 20 years ago, her power finally consuming her from within. But the curse remains, embedded in your mate's very essence. Can it be broken? Alyra asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Dane's expression was grave. Yes, but the cost is high, and the time is short. You have 7 lunar cycles from the moment the seal broke to complete the mate bond fully. Mark and claim, body and soul. If you fail, the curse will activate its final purpose. It will kill you both. The Omega first, her heart simply stopping. And then the Alpha King, as the severed bond tears him apart from within. 7 moons. 7 cycles to solidify a connection with a man she'd known less than a week. 7 chances to defy a curse that had been crafted specifically to destroy her. The silence that followed was thick and heavy. Kale's grip on her hand tightened. Not painful, but possessive. Protective. Then we have our path, Kale said finally. We strengthen the bond. We break the curse. And then we reclaim what was stolen from me. It won't be simple, my lord, Dane warned. The bond can only be completed through choice, not compulsion. Forcing it will trigger the curse just as surely as failing to complete it. Your mate must choose you freely, must accept the marking and the claiming with full knowledge and consent. And she must have time to know you, to trust you, before that choice can be genuine. Kale looked at Alyra, his storm-gray eyes searching hers. Then I will earn her trust. I will prove myself worthy of her choice, however long it takes. You have 6 moons left, Dane said quietly. 6 moons. Alyra felt the weight of that deadline settle over her shoulders like a physical burden. 6 cycles to fall in love with a man who'd been entombed for 2 centuries. 6 chances to accept a fate that terrified and tantalized her in equal measure. Tell me about the council, Kale said, releasing Alyra's hand to pace the ruined hall. His movements were still stiff, his body not yet fully recovered from centuries of stasis. Who rules now? What forces do they command? Dane's expression darkened. 5 lords govern in your absence, descended from those who betrayed you. Lord Varen leads them, your cousin Aldrich's grandson. He has inherited both his grandfather's cunning and his cruelty. The council rules through fear and dark magic, bleeding the land dry with taxes and forced conscription. The people suffer, but they have no champion. No one dares stand against 5 lords who command armies and sorcery. And my loyal wolves? Kyle asked. Those who stood with me against Aldrich's coup? Most were slaughtered that night. Those who survived were hunted down in the years that followed. A few, like myself, were sealed in magical prisons, meant to serve as warnings. I know of perhaps a dozen others scattered across the kingdom, trapped in various forms. When you broke free, I felt some of them wake as I did, but how many survive? How many remain loyal after 2 centuries? I cannot say. Kyle absorbed this information with the stoic acceptance of a warrior accustomed to bad news. But Alyra saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his fists clenched and unclenched. He'd woken to find his kingdom stolen, his people scattered or dead, and his mate carrying a curse designed specifically to destroy them both. We need allies, Kale said. We need information. And we need to understand this curse fully if we're to break it. There is a healer, Dane said slowly. An old woman who lives in the frozen peaks, 3 weeks hard travel north of here. Sage is her name, and she is the last of the white mages, those who opposed the council's dark sorcery from the beginning. If anyone can study the curse and tell us how to break it safely, it would be her. 3 weeks. That would eat into their already limited time. But what choice did they have? Kyle turned to Alyra, and she saw the question in his eyes before he spoke it. It's your decision. We can stay here, try to understand the curse ourselves, and hope we have time. Or we can risk the journey to find help. Either way carries danger. Alyra thought about the bond between them, that constant pull that had only grown stronger over their days together. She thought about the curse, invisible but deadly, counting down the days of her life. She thought about this man who'd waited 200 years for her, who'd chosen imprisonment over accepting a false mate. We go north, she said. "We find this sage. We learn how to break the curse properly. I didn't survive 22 years of being called defective just to die from choosing wrong now." Something that might have been admiration flickered across Kale's face. "Then tomorrow we prepare. We gather what supplies we can from these ruins, and in 2 days, we head for the frozen peaks." That night, they made camp in what had once been the royal apartments. The walls still stood here, providing shelter from the wind that had picked up as evening fell. Dine had started a fire in the hearth, miraculously still functional despite 2 centuries of neglect. Alira sat close to the flames, letting the warmth seep into bones that felt perpetually cold. Kyle settled beside her, not touching but near, close enough that she felt his presence like a tangible thing. "You asked me once why I chose the seal," Kyle said quietly. "Why I accepted imprisonment rather than death fighting." Alira nodded, remembering that conversation from days ago when she'd still been too overwhelmed to process most of what was happening. The night before Aldrich made his move, I had a vision. The moon goddess herself appeared to me in dreams and showed me the future. I saw you, Alira. Not your face, not your name, but your essence. A woman born 2 centuries hence, marked by suffering, bearing a curse meant to destroy us both. She told me that if I died that night, as Aldrich planned, you would be born into a world with no hope, no champion, no mate to free you from the curse. You would live and die in misery, never knowing what you could have been. His voice was raw with emotion, and when Alira looked at him, she saw moisture glistening in his eyes. She gave me a choice. Die as a king, or live as a prisoner with the chance, however slim, that you would survive long enough to reach me, that together we might change the fate she'd foreseen. He turned to face her fully. "I chose you, Alira. I chose the possibility of you over the certainty of an honorable death. I have been waiting 200 years for this chance to know you, to earn your trust, to build something real between us." Alira's throat was tight, her eyes burning. No one had ever chosen her before. Not her pack, not the wolves who'd rejected her, not even the father who'd given her up without a fight. But this man, this alpha king, had chosen her before she was even born, had suffered centuries of imprisonment on the mere hope that she might reach him. "I don't know if I can be what you need," she whispered. "I don't know how to be a queen or a mate, or anything other than a servant who scrubs floors." Kale's hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. "You've already proven yourself stronger than anyone I've ever known. You survived a curse meant to kill you. You opened a tomb that should have been your death. You've walked beside me for days without complaint, despite exhaustion and fear. You are exactly what I need, Alira. You just don't see it yet." The bond between them flared hot and bright, responding to his words, his touch, his absolute certainty. Alira felt it pulling her toward him, felt her body leaning in despite her mind's hesitation. Kale's thumb brushed across her cheek, and she realized tears were falling. "We have time," he murmured. "Not as much as I'd like, but we have time. Time for you to know me. Time for trust to grow. Time for this bond to become something you choose rather than something fate imposed." He pulled back, giving her space, though she could see the effort it cost him. The bond wanted them close, wanted them joined. Fighting it was like swimming against a riptide, but he would fight it for her, would give her the time and space she needed to make this choice freely, and somehow, that restraint, that respect for her autonomy, made Alira want to close the distance between them more than any amount of pressure could have. Instead, she settled for staying close to the fire, with Kale beside her, and Dane keeping watch at the entrance. Tomorrow they would begin preparations for the journey north. Tomorrow they would start the race against time and curse. Tonight, they would simply breathe and let the bond grow stronger, one heartbeat at a time. Chapter 4. Shelter in the Peaks. The journey to the frozen peaks took just over 2 weeks, and every day of it tested Alira in ways she'd never imagined. They left the ruins with what little Dane had managed to salvage over the years. Rough traveling cloaks, dried meat that tasted like leather, water skins that leaked if not held carefully. Kale led them north through terrain that grew progressively more hostile. Rolling hills gave way to rocky foothills, which in turn climbed toward mountains whose peaks were lost in perpetual clouds. Illyra's feet, accustomed to stone floors and short walks between kitchen and hall, blistered within the first 3 days. She wrapped them in strips of cloth torn from her already tattered dress and kept walking. Complaining would only slow them down, and they had 5 moons left. 5 cycles to reach this healer, understand the curse, and complete a bond that still felt both impossibly intimate and frustratingly distant. Kyle watched her constantly, not obviously, but she felt his eyes tracking her movements, assessing her stamina, noting when she favored her left foot or when her breathing grew labored. On the 4th day, when she stumbled over a root she was too exhausted to see, he simply swept her into his arms without a word and carried her for the next 2 hours. "I can walk," Elira protested, though secretly grateful for the reprieve. "I know," Kale replied, "but we make better time this way, and your pride isn't worth losing days to infected blisters." It was practical, pragmatic, yet the way he held her, careful and secure, spoke of something beyond mere efficiency. The mate bond hummed between them, content with the closeness, and Elira found herself relaxing against his chest, despite her embarrassment. Dane scouted ahead, his experience as a warrior evident in how he moved through unfamiliar territory. He found game trails that made the climbing easier, located streams where they could refill their water, spotted signs of danger before they stumbled into it. On the 7th night, he returned to camp with tension written across his weathered face. "Hunters," he said quietly, settling beside the small fire Kale had built in a natural hollow between rocks. "Council hunters, judging by their gear. 3 of them, moving parallel to our path about a mile east." Kale's expression hardened. "They're searching for us? They're searching for something. Could be us. Could be general patrols. The council has always maintained hunters in these regions, keeping the population fearful and compliant." Diane poked at the fire with a stick. "We should assume they know you've escaped and are actively looking. How long until they cross our trail?" Kale asked. "If we're lucky, not at all. If we're not, tomorrow morning when they sweep west." They extinguished the fire and moved camp twice during the night, putting distance between themselves and the hunters. Elira walked in darkness, guided only by Kale's hand on her elbow and Dane's whispered warnings about obstacles. By dawn, she was so exhausted she could barely see straight. But they'd evaded the hunters. For now. The incident drove home just how precarious their situation was. They weren't just racing against a magical deadline. They were fugitives in a kingdom that wanted Kale dead, and Elira returned to whatever fate the council had planned for failed ritual participants. On the 10th day, they reached the foothills of the True Mountains. The air grew thin and cold, each breath burning Elira's lungs. Snow appeared in patches at first, then in persistent drifts that made walking treacherous. Kale fashioned rough snowshoes from branches and rope, and though they were crude, they kept them from sinking knee-deep with every step. "How much farther?" Elira asked through chattering teeth. The cloak Dane had given her was meant for autumn travel, not mountain winters. 2 more days to the settlement where Sage lives, Dane replied. Though these last 2 days will be the hardest. The path grows steep, and there are places where a single misstep means a fall that no wolf, no matter how strong, could survive. That night, they found shelter in a shallow cave barely large enough for the 3 of them. Kale built a fire at the entrance, using his body to block the wind that howled across the mountainside. Elira huddled close to the flames, trying to absorb whatever warmth she could. Dine excused himself to scout the area, leaving Elira and Kale alone for the first time in days. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of burning wood and the distant moan of wind. "You're stronger than you look," Kale said finally, his voice low and rough. "Most wolves raised in comfort wouldn't have made it this far." "I wasn't raised in comfort," Elira replied. "I was raised to survive. It's different. Tell me about your childhood." It wasn't quite a command, but it carried the weight of genuine interest. "You've mentioned your village, your father, but little else." Elira stared into the fire, watching flames dance and twist. Talking about her past had never brought anything but pain, but something about the isolation of this cave, the intimacy of shared warmth in hostile cold, loosened her tongue. My mother died when I was young. I don't remember much about her except that she used to sing to me. My father, he worked in the fields until it killed him. After he died, the village kept me because tradition demanded it, but they made sure I knew I was a burden. When I didn't shift at 16, they couldn't get rid of me fast enough. They should have protected you, Kale said, anger threading through his words. A pack's strength is measured by how it treats its weakest members, not by how quickly it discards them. That's not how the world works anymore, Elira said bitterly. Maybe it did 200 years ago when you ruled, but now, weakness is eliminated. The strong survive and the rest, we're just fuel for whatever fires the council decides to light. Kale was quiet for a long moment. Then he shifted closer, closing the distance between them until their shoulders nearly touched. When I reclaim my throne, when we break this curse, and I have the power to reshape this kingdom, that will be the first thing I change. No pack will cast out their own. No Omega will be treated as disposable. I swear it to you. The conviction in his voice sent shivers down Elira's spine that had nothing to do with cold. You speak like it's inevitable. Like there's no possibility of failure. Because there isn't, Kale said simply. I didn't survive 2 centuries in a tomb to fail now. I didn't wait for you only to lose you to a curse or a council of cowards. We will succeed, Elira. It's not hope or optimism. It's certainty born from the knowledge that any other outcome is unacceptable. Elira turned to look at him, really look at him. In the firelight, his features were softer, more human. The hard planes of his face, the scar that ran from temple to jaw, the eyes that could glow with power, but now held only warmth and fierce determination. This was the man fate had chosen for her, this alpha king who spoke of certainty and swore oaths about protecting the weak. I'm afraid, she admitted quietly. Afraid of the curse, afraid of failing you, afraid of this bond that keeps growing stronger whether I'm ready or not. I've spent my whole life being told I'm not good enough, and now I'm supposed to be mate to a king? It doesn't make sense. Kale's hand found hers, his fingers intertwining with her smaller ones. The bond flared at the contact, warm and grounding. Fear is wisdom, not weakness. You'd be a fool not to be afraid given what we face. But you're not alone in this fear, Elira. I'm terrified too. Terrified of what this kingdom has become in my absence. Terrified that I won't be strong enough to protect you from what's coming. Terrified that you'll realize you deserve better than a king who failed his people so spectacularly that he ended up sealed in stone for 2 centuries. The vulnerability in his admission cracked something open in Elira's chest. He was afraid. This powerful alpha king who commanded guards with a single word and carried her through mountains without complaint, he was scared too. Then we'll be afraid together, Elira said, squeezing his hand. And maybe that will be enough. Kyle raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent heat racing up her arm. It will be more than enough. It will be everything. They sat in silence after that, hands joined, watching the fire burn low. When Dane returned an hour later, he took one look at them and settled on the opposite side of the cave without comment, giving them what privacy the small space allowed. That night, Elira slept pressed against Kale's side, using his body heat as a shield against the mountain cold. She felt his heartbeat beneath her palm, steady and strong, felt the bond between them pulse in rhythm with their breathing. And for the first time since touching that tomb seal, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could actually survive what fate had thrown at them. The final 2 days of climbing were brutal. The path, such as it was, consisted of narrow ledges with sheer drops on one side and vertical rock faces on the other. Snow fell continuously, reducing visibility to mere feet. More than once, Elira's foot slipped on ice-slicked stone, and only Kale's reflexes kept her from plummeting into the void below. Don't look down, he instructed each time, his arm iron solid around her waist. Eyes forward, one step at a time. Dane led them through a particularly treacherous section, where the path had partially collapsed, requiring them to edge along a ledge barely wider than Elira's shoulders. She pressed her back against the rock face, sliding sideways inch by inch, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "You're doing well," Cale murmured from beside her. He'd positioned himself between her and the drop, ready to grab her if she fell. "Just a little further. I can see where the path widens ahead." Elira focused on his voice, on the solidity of stone against her back, on the knowledge that these two warriors wouldn't let her fall. One slide. Another. And then the ledge broadened, and she could breathe again. They reached the settlement on the afternoon of the 14th day. It wasn't much, just a cluster of rough stone buildings huddled together against the mountain wind, smoke rising from chimneys. But to Elira, exhausted and frozen to her bones, it looked like paradise. Dane led them directly to the largest building, a sturdy structure with walls thick enough to block the howling wind. He knocked in a specific pattern, 3 quick raps followed by 2 slow ones. The door opened to reveal a woman who defied every expectation Elira had formed during their journey. She was ancient, her face a landscape of wrinkles that spoke of centuries rather than mere decades. Her hair, pure white and braided in a thick rope down her back, seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. But her eyes, pale gray and sharp as flint, were vibrantly alive. "Commander Dane," the woman said, her voice surprisingly strong. "I felt the seal break 2 weeks ago. I wondered when you would arrive. Sage?" Dane inclined his head respectfully. "May we enter? We've traveled far and have much to discuss." Sage's gaze moved past Dane to Cale, and something flickered across her ancient face. Recognition, perhaps, or awe. "My king," she murmured, dropping into a curtsy that looked painful given her age. 200 years I have waited to say those words again. "Welcome to my humble sanctuary." Then her eyes found Elira, and the healer went very still. The air seemed to thicken, and Elira felt power brush against her skin, assessing, measuring. Sage's eyes widened fractionally. "Moon goddess, preserve us," Sage breathed. "Child, you carry more than just a curse. You carry a destiny that could save or damn us all. Come in, quickly. We have much work to do, and precious little time to do it." They followed her inside, into warmth and shelter, and the beginning of understanding. The first step toward breaking a curse that had been 2 centuries in the making. Chapter 5. Blood and Fire. They spent 2 weeks in Sage's sanctuary, and during that time, Elira learned truths that shattered and remade her understanding of the world. The first revelation came within hours of their arrival. Sage had settled them by her fire, provided warm broth that tasted of herbs and healing, and then examined Elira with magic that felt nothing like the dark sorcery of the council. This power was gentler, probing carefully, respectful of boundaries even as it searched for answers. "The curse is more intricate than I expected," Sage said finally, her pale gray eyes troubled. "It's woven into your very essence, placed before your first breath. But there's something else. Something the sorceress who cast it may not have anticipated." "What?" Kyle demanded, his hand finding Elira's automatically. The bond between them had grown stronger over their journey, to the point where separation felt physically uncomfortable. Sage looked at Elira with something approaching reverence. "You're not just his mate. You carry royal blood. The maternal line, specifically. The queen who ruled beside the Alpha King 200 years ago, before she was murdered in the coup. You are her direct descendant." The words hung in the air. Impossible, and yet somehow inevitable. Elira felt the truth of them resonating in her bones. "My mother," she whispered. "She died when I was young. I never knew her family, never knew where she came from. She was hiding," Sage said gently. "Protecting you. The royal bloodline was hunted to extinction after the coup. Any child who might have a claim to the throne was killed. Your mother must have concealed her identity, lived as a commoner, and died keeping that secret. The curse was meant to kill you before you could awaken to your heritage, before you could become what the moon goddess intended. Not just the Alpha King's mate, but his true queen." Cale's grip on Elira's hand tightened. The council knew. That's why they targeted Omega births so viciously. They weren't just trying to prevent my mate from freeing me. They were trying to eliminate the royal bloodline entirely. "Precisely," Sage confirmed. "United, The two of you represent the legitimate throne. Your combined bloodlines make you unassailable legally, magically, and politically. The council has ruled through fear and stolen power for 2 centuries. But they have no true claim. You do. The weight of that knowledge settled over Alira like a physical burden. She'd gone from worthless Omega to potential queen in the span of hours, and her mind struggled to process the magnitude of the shift. Over the following days, Sage worked to understand the curse's mechanics. She explained that the mate bond, normally a blessing, had been weaponized. The curse used the bond's power against them, turning what should have strengthened them into a countdown to death. You have 3 moons remaining, Sage said on their 5th day in the sanctuary. Her expression was grave. I can accelerate the bond's development, help it reach the strength needed to break the curse, but it will be agonizing. The process that should take months will be compressed into weeks. Your body will fight it, Alira. The curse will fight it. You'll experience pain unlike anything you've endured before. And if we don't accelerate it? Kyle asked. You won't have time. 3 moons is barely sufficient as it is. Without intervention, you'll reach the deadline with the bond incomplete, and you'll both die. Alira looked at Kyle, seeing her own fear reflected in his storm-gray eyes. Do it, she said. Whatever it takes. The ritual Sage performed that night would haunt Alira's dreams for years to come. The old healer drew symbols on the floor in what looked like silver dust, positioned Alira and Kale at the center, and began chanting in a language that predated kingdoms. When the magic hit, Alira screamed. It felt like every nerve in her body was being set aflame and frozen simultaneously. The bond between her and Kyle, usually a warm presence in her chest, became a raging inferno. She felt it burrowing deeper, claiming more of her soul, intertwining with parts of herself she hadn't known existed. Kale held her through it, his own body shaking with the strain. The bond affected him too, though not as severely. She could feel his pain bleeding through their connection, his desperation to take her suffering into himself. I'm here, he kept repeating, his voice rough. I'm here, Alira. Hold on to me. She did, clinging to his presence like an anchor in a storm of agony. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, time losing all meaning in the face of such overwhelming sensation. When the magic finally released them, Alira collapsed against Kale's chest, sobbing. It's done, Sage said, her own voice weary. The bond is stronger now, strong enough that when the curse tries to kill you, it will find resistance. But you're not out of danger. The curse is still embedded in your essence, still counting down. To break it completely, you need to awaken your wolf. How? Alira gasped out. I've never been able to shift. The curse blocks it. The curse blocks it because your wolf is more powerful than the sorceress anticipated. You don't have a standard Omega wolf, Alira. You have a royal wolf, a white wolf born of the queen's bloodline. The curse had to be strong enough to contain that power, which makes it harder to break. But with the mate bond accelerated, with Kale's strength supporting you, awakening is possible. It will just require a catalyst. Sage wouldn't elaborate on what that catalyst might be, no matter how much they pressed. You'll know it when the time comes, was all she would say. They trained during those 2 weeks. Dane worked with Alira on basic combat, teaching her to defend herself if the worst happened. Kyle spent hours in meditation, rebuilding his strength, preparing for the battles ahead, and Sage continued her examinations, her magical probings, searching for any weakness in the curse they could exploit. On the 10th day in the sanctuary, everything changed. Dane returned from a scouting expedition with blood on his armor and fear in his eyes. Hunters, he reported. Council hunters, at least 20 of them, moving up the mountain. They're searching systematically, checking every settlement, every cave. Someone told them we came this way. Alira felt ice flood her veins. How long? 2 days, maybe 3 if the weather slows them. But they're determined. And they have something with them. Cages lined with silver and marked with dark runes. They're prepared to capture, not just kill. Kale was on his feet immediately. We leave tonight. If they find this place, they'll slaughter everyone here. I won't allow Sage to be punished for helping us. No, Sage said firmly. You stay. Let them come. That's suicide. Dane protested. Perhaps, Sage said with a small knowing smile. Or perhaps it's exactly what we need. The curse requires a catalyst to break. What better catalyst than mortal danger? Alira's wolf will never emerge if she stays hidden and protected. She needs to fight, to face death, to choose survival not just for herself, but for those she cares about. That's when the wolf will answer. Kyle looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Sage's expression stopped him. The old healer knew things, saw patterns in fate that others couldn't. If she said this needed to happen, it likely did. They prepared for 3 days, fortifying the sanctuary as best they could. The other residents, mostly elderly wolves and a handful of refugees, were frightened but determined. They'd fled the council's cruelty and found sanctuary here. They wouldn't surrender it without a fight. The hunters arrived on the afternoon of the 3rd day, just as a storm rolled in from the peaks. 20 men in dark armor, carrying weapons enhanced with dark magic. Their leader was a scarred veteran with eyes cold as winter. "We know you're harboring fugitives," he called out, his voice carrying over the wind. "Surrender them, and the rest of you will be spared." Sage stepped forward, her ancient frame somehow projecting more authority than all 20 hunters combined. "There are no fugitives here, only those seeking shelter from the storm." The leader smiled, and it was a terrible thing. "We'll determine that ourselves." The hunters moved to attack the sanctuary, and chaos erupted. Dine met them first, his sword flashing. He was outnumbered, but centuries of experience made him deadly. He cut down 3 hunters in the first minute, his movements precise and brutal. But there were too many, and they fought with the enhanced strength of dark magic. Kale joined the fight, and his presence changed the battle's dynamic immediately. Even weakened, even not fully recovered from 2 centuries of imprisonment, he was an alpha king. His power radiated outward, forcing wolves to submit, disrupting the hunters' coordination. But the dark magic they carried resisted his commands, and he had to resort to physical combat. Elira watched from the sanctuary entrance, her hands clenched into fists. She was useless here. No wolf, no magic, no combat training beyond Dane's basic lessons. She could only watch as the 2 warriors she'd come to care for fought for their lives. One of the hunters broke through their defense, charging toward the sanctuary where the elderly and weak had taken shelter. His sword was raised, his intent clear. He would slaughter everyone inside if it meant drawing Kale away from the fight. Something inside Elira snapped. She didn't think, didn't plan, just moved, putting herself between the hunter and the sanctuary door. The man's sword came down, and Elira threw up her hands in a futile attempt to block it. The blade never reached her. A barrier of silver light erupted from Elira's palms, solid as steel, blazing with power she'd never known she possessed. The sword shattered against it, the hunter stumbling backward in shock. Elira stared at her hands, at the light pouring from them. This was magic. Her magic. Royal magic, inherited from the queen's bloodline, awakened by desperation and the need to protect. The hunter recovered, drawing a dagger, lunging forward. Elira's body moved on instinct, the barrier shifting to block him. But she was untrained, uncertain, and the hunter was experienced. He feinted, dodged around the barrier, and drove the dagger toward her heart. Kyle's roar shook the mountain. Elira felt the mate bond explode with fury and terror, felt him abandoning his own battle to reach her. But he was too far away. The dagger was too close. She was going to die, and something inside her, something that had been locked away for 22 years, finally woke up. The wolf that emerged from Elira's transformation wasn't small. It wasn't weak. It was massive, easily the size of an alpha male, with fur as white as fresh snow and eyes that glowed gold. The royal wolf, the bloodline made manifest, power incarnate. The hunter's dagger scraped harmlessly off her thick fur. Elira, acting on instinct alone, struck. Her jaws closed around the man's throat, and he fell, dead before he hit the ground. Around the battlefield, every wolf, friend and foe alike, froze. They stared at the white wolf standing in the sanctuary doorway, radiating power that made the air shimmer. "Impossible," one of the hunters breathed. The white wolf, The Queen's bloodline. It still exists. Kyle shifted into his own wolf form, a massive black beast that complemented Elira's white perfectly. Together, they were terrifying and magnificent. The Alpha King and his queen, united at last. The remaining hunters broke and ran. They'd come prepared to capture fugitives, not face legends made flesh. When the battle ended, and Elira shifted back to human form, collapsing from exhaustion, Kyle was there to catch her. "You did it," he whispered, wonder and pride thick in his voice. "Your wolf awakened. You're magnificent." Sage approached, placing a gnarled hand on Elira's shoulder. "The curse broke the moment you shifted. The power of your wolf, combined with the strength of the mate bond, shattered it completely. You're free, child. You both are." Elira felt the truth of it. The countdown that had been ticking in her blood since touching the tomb seal was gone. The curse, that malevolent presence that had haunted her since before birth, had been destroyed. They were free, but their victory came with a cost. "The hunters will report what they saw," Dane said grimly, joining them. "The council will know that both of you are alive, powerful, and united. They'll send armies next time, not just hunters." Kale's arms tightened around Elira. "Then we don't give them the chance. We take the fight to them. We march on the capital, expose their crimes, and reclaim the throne that was stolen 200 years ago." "You're not strong enough yet," Sage warned. "Neither of you. Your bond is complete, yes, but you're both newly awakened to your full power. You need time to train, to master what you've become." "We don't have time," Elira said quietly, her voice hoarse from screaming during her transformation. "Every day we wait is another day the council tightens their grip. Another day innocent people suffer under their rule. We go now, while they're still reeling from today's report. We strike before they can prepare." Kale looked at her, seeing not the broken Omega he'd found at the tomb, but the queen she'd become. "Are you sure?" Elira met his gaze steadily. "I've been afraid my entire life. Afraid of being worthless. Afraid of dying. Afraid of disappointing everyone. I'm done being afraid. It's time to take back what's ours." Sage smiled, though worry still clouded her ancient eyes. "Then I'll send word to the scattered loyal wolves, those who survived the purges, who've been hiding and waiting for this day. It's time they came home." As night fell over the sanctuary, Elira stood beside Kyle and looked out over the mountains toward the distant capital. Somewhere beyond those peaks, the council waited, unaware that their 200-year reign of terror was about to end. The White Wolf and the Alpha King were coming, and nothing would stop them from claiming what was rightfully theirs. Chapter 6. Crown of Silver and Ash. The journey to Thornhaven took 3 weeks of careful planning and gathering allies. Word spread through secret channels that the true Alpha King lived and his queen had awakened. Wolves who'd hidden for 2 centuries, scattered and afraid, began to emerge from the shadows. They came in 1s and 2s at first. An elderly warrior who'd fought in Kale's original guard, his body scarred but his loyalty undiminished. A middle-aged healer who'd been just a child when the coup happened, carrying her grandmother's memories of better times. Young wolves who'd only heard stories of a just kingdom, desperate for something to believe in beyond the council's cruelty. By the time they reached the outskirts of the capital, their forces numbered nearly 200. Not an army by traditional standards, but these were loyalists tested by time, driven by hope, and led by legends reborn. Elira stood on a hillside overlooking Thornhaven, the city sprawling before her in the valley below. She'd left this place as a servant, destined for death. She was returning as a queen, ready to reclaim her throne. "The Festival of the Harvest begins tonight," Dane said, joining her at the overlook. "The council will be making their public appearance in the main square. Every noble family, every merchant of note, thousands of common citizens. It's tradition dating back centuries." "Then that's when we strike," Kale said, his hand finding Elira's shoulder. The touch sent warmth through her, the mate bond humming contentedly. "We reveal ourselves before the entire capital. No shadows, no secrets. Let the people see who truly rules. It's dangerous, Diane warned, though approval gleamed in his gray eyes. The council will have guards, possibly hundreds. Dark magic, contingencies we can't anticipate. I know, Kale said, but the alternative is a long, bloody war that tears this kingdom apart and kills innocents caught between us. Better to end it quickly, decisively, in a way that leaves no doubt about the legitimate throne. They infiltrated the capital that afternoon, using the festival chaos as cover. Alira wore a simple cloak that hid her distinctive features, walking through streets she'd once known as a servant. Everything looked different from this side of freedom. The poverty was more obvious now. Children begging at corners, buildings in disrepair, guards everywhere, their presence oppressive rather than protective. This is what 200 years of council rule has created, Kale said quietly, his jaw clenched. Fear and decay dressed up as prosperity. A network of underground resistors provided shelter in a warehouse near the market square. These were citizens who'd suffered under the council's reign, who'd lost family to unjust taxes or cruel laws. They welcomed Kale and Alira with tears and desperate hope. We've waited so long, an older woman said, gripping Alira's hands. Waited for someone strong enough to stand against them. Please, my lady. My queen. End this nightmare. The weight of expectation settled over Alira's shoulders. These people were trusting her, believing in her. She couldn't let them down. As twilight fell, they prepared for what would come. Alira donned armor that had been hastily crafted for her, leather reinforced with steel, designed for mobility rather than heavy protection. She looked at herself in a polished shield used as a mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was the cowering servant. In her place stood a warrior queen. Kyle approached, already armored himself, his black plate gleaming in the lamplight. He took her hands, his storm-gray eyes intense. Whatever happens tonight, know that I'm proud of you. Proud of your strength, your courage, your determination to see this through. You've become everything I hoped for and more than I ever deserved. We do this together, Alira said firmly. Equal partners. That's what we agreed. Equal partners. Kale confirmed, raising her hand to his lips. My queen. The festival square was packed when they arrived. Thousands of citizens gathered to watch the council's traditional address. Lord Varen stood on a raised platform, flanked by the 4 other council lords, all dressed in their finery. Guards lined the square, at least 100 visible, likely more hidden. Kale and Alira waited at the edge of the crowd, surrounded by their loyalists positioned strategically throughout. Dane had coordinated everything, timing precise, plans layered with contingencies. When Varen began his speech about prosperity and the council's benevolent guidance, Alira felt her stomach turn. Now, Kale said quietly. They moved as one, pushing through the crowd that parted instinctively before them. Wolves recognized power when they saw it, and the combined presence of an alpha king and his queen was impossible to ignore. By the time they reached the platform, the entire square had gone silent, thousands of eyes locked on them. Varen's face went from confusion to recognition, to absolute fury in seconds. "Seize them!" he roared. "Guards!" Kyle's power erupted outward, his alpha command crashing over the square like a physical wave. Guards who'd been moving to attack stopped mid-stride, their wolves forced into submission. Not all of them. Some resisted, the dark magic in their weapons providing protection. But most fell to their knees, unable to fight their instincts. People of Thornhaven, Kale's voice carried across the square, amplified somehow by his power. I am Kale Stormborn, your true Alpha King, imprisoned 200 years ago by traitors who stole my throne and murdered my people. I have returned to reclaim what was taken and restore justice to this kingdom. Lies! Varen shouted, but his voice cracked with fear. This is an imposter, a pretender using dark magic to deceive you. Alira stepped forward, and as she did, she let her wolf surface just beneath her skin. Her eyes shifted, glowing gold, and the mark of her royal bloodline became visible on her neck, a silver crescent that shimmered with inherited power. I am Alira, descendant of the Queen's bloodline, the last of the royal line that you tried to exterminate. Your council killed children to prevent this moment, cursed innocents, ruled through terror for 2 centuries. That ends tonight. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some fearful, some hopeful, all uncertain. Then an elderly woman near the front called out, "Prove it. Prove you're who you claim." Varen seized on this. "Yes, prove it. Anyone can claim royal blood. Show us something beyond parlor tricks and pretty speeches." Kale looked at Elira, a question in his eyes. She nodded. They'd discussed this possibility, this need for undeniable proof. What they were about to do was risky, intimate, and would change everything. Together, they moved to the center of the platform. Kyle pulled Elira close, and she felt the mate bond flare between them, hot and bright. They'd been marked already, the bite on her neck and his a physical symbol of their connection. But they hadn't completed the public ritual, the formal claiming that would seal their bond permanently before witnesses. In the old ways, Kale announced, a true Alpha King and his queen could only rule united, their bond recognized by the moon goddess herself. If we are frauds, this ritual will fail. If we are true, you will see proof that cannot be denied. He cupped Elira's face, his thumb brushing across her cheek. "Are you ready? Always," she whispered. The kiss was more than physical contact. It was the completion of something that had begun the moment she'd touched that tomb seal. The mate bond, already strong, solidified completely. Elira felt it like a chain of silver light wrapping around her heart, binding her to Kale in ways that transcended mere marriage or partnership. Power exploded from them in a wave of pure silver light. It swept across the square, washing over every person present. And in its wake, something changed. The oppressive weight of dark magic that had hung over the capital for 2 centuries simply dissolved. Enchantments the council had maintained, spells of fear and compliance, broke like spiderwebs in a storm. People gasped, crying out as they felt the change. Wolves who'd been suppressed found their strength returning. Citizens who'd lived under constant dread felt hope kindle for the first time in memory. Above the platform, visible to everyone, an image formed in the air. The moon goddess herself, her form made of silver light and ancient magic. She looked down on Kale and Elira with approval, then spoke in a voice that resonated in everyone's bones. "I bear witness to this union. King and queen, chosen and true, blessed by moon and star. Let none who value their soul challenge what I have sanctioned." The image faded, but the message remained. The moon goddess had appeared to confirm their claim. There could be no higher authority, no greater proof. The square erupted. Some people fell to their knees in reverence. Others cheered, decades of suppressed hope finally finding voice. The guards who'd been held by Kale's alpha command released their weapons, shifting allegiance in the face of undeniable divine approval. Varen tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Elira's wolf burst free, white fur gleaming as she crossed the platform in a single leap. Her jaws closed around his ankle, bringing him down hard. She shifted back to human form, standing over him with a sword she'd taken from a surrendered guard. "You ordered my death before I was even born," Elira said, her voice cold as winter. "You tried to exterminate my bloodline. You cursed innocence and ruled through terror. Give me one reason I shouldn't end you here." Varen stared up at her, all his arrogance stripped away, leaving only a frightened old man. "Mercy," he gasped. "I beg for mercy." "The same mercy you showed to countless others?" Elira asked. But she didn't strike. Instead, she looked at Kyle, who'd joined her. "What does justice look like for 200 years of atrocities?" Kyle studied Varen for a long moment. Death would be too quick. He'll stand trial, face every family he's wronged, answer for every crime. Then he'll spend whatever remains of his life in the same dungeons where he imprisoned innocents. It was just. It was measured. It was the kind of punishment that showed they were different from the council, that their rule would be about justice rather than revenge. The other 4 council lords surrendered without fight, their power broken, their schemes exposed. Guards loyal to the old regime either fled or swore new oaths. By the time the moon reached its peak, the square belonged to Kale and Elira completely. Dane approached, his weathered face split by a rare smile. "The castle garrison has surrendered. The treasury is secure. The city is yours, my king, my queen." Elira looked out over the crowd, at thousands of faces watching her with hope and fear and desperate need for leadership. This was real. They'd actually done it. In one night, through courage and divine blessing, they'd ended 2 centuries of tyranny. But as the adrenaline faded, exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. Cale caught her as her knees buckled, lifting her into his arms. "The castle," he told Dane. "Prepare rooms. We'll address the kingdom formally tomorrow. Tonight, my queen needs rest." He carried her through streets lined with cheering citizens, through castle gates she'd once entered in chains, into halls where she'd scrubbed floors. Everything looked different now, not because the place had changed, but because she had. The royal chambers were vast, luxurious in ways that made Elira uncomfortable. But Cale simply laid her on the enormous bed, removed her armor with gentle efficiency, and settled beside her. "We did it," Elira whispered, still hardly believing it. "You did it," Cale corrected. "Your courage, your determination, your willingness to risk everything. I merely provided support." "We did it together," Elira insisted, finding his hand and intertwining their fingers. "Equal partners, remember? Equal partners," Cale agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Now rest, my queen. Tomorrow we begin the real work of rebuilding a kingdom. But tonight, just rest." Elira closed her eyes, the mate bond humming contentedly between them. Outside, the capital celebrated. Tomorrow would bring challenges she couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, wrapped in her mate's arms, in the castle that was now her home, Elira allowed herself to simply feel safe. The White Wolf and the Alpha King had claimed their throne. Now came the harder part, proving they deserved to keep it. Chapter 7. Vows of Silver and Gold. The days following their conquest of the capital blurred together in a whirlwind of activity. Kyle and Elira found themselves thrust into the machinery of governance, making decisions that affected thousands, undoing 2 centuries of corrupt laws, trying to heal wounds that ran generations deep. But the kingdom demanded more than just leadership. It demanded ceremony. The people needed to see their monarchs crowned properly, to witness the formal ascension that would cement legitimacy beyond any doubt. Sage arrived from the mountains a week after the takeover, accompanied by several of the refugees who'd sheltered at her sanctuary. The old healer took one look at the chaos of the castle and immediately set about organizing the coronation ritual. The ceremony must follow the old ways, Sage insisted, spreading ancient texts across the council table. Not the bastardized version the council used to legitimize their rule, but the true ritual dating back 1,000 years. Only then will the moon goddess's blessing be complete. Elira studied the texts, feeling overwhelmed by the complexity. These rituals take weeks to prepare. The purification ceremonies alone require 10 days. "Then we begin immediately," Sage said firmly. "The kingdom is watching. Allies and enemies alike wait to see if you're truly chosen or merely clever usurpers. This coronation will answer that question permanently." So they began. The purification rituals came first. 10 days of meditation and fasting. Ritual baths in water blessed by moonlight. Prayers offered at dawn and dusk. Elira found the process exhausting, but also centering. Each day stripped away another layer of doubt, another piece of the scared servant she'd been, revealing the queen beneath. Cale underwent the same rituals, though his were focused on reconnecting with the power he'd lost during his imprisonment. Elira would see him sometimes in the early morning, standing bare-chested in the courtyard as priests marked his skin with symbols of protection and strength. He looked like something from legend. A warrior king carved from myth and moonlight. They weren't allowed to touch during the purification period. The separation was torture, the mate bond pulling at them constantly, demanding proximity, but Sage was adamant that the ritual required it. "Your bond is strong," the healer explained on the 5th day when Elira complained. "But the coronation will amplify it further, weaving it into the very fabric of the kingdom. If you enter the ceremony already saturated with each other's presence, the magic won't have room to work properly. The separation creates space, hunger, need. When you finally come together during the ritual, the power will be explosive." Explosive turned out to be an understatement. The coronation was scheduled for the full moon, exactly 1 month after they'd reclaimed the capital. The entire city prepared, decorating streets with silver ribbons and white flowers, the traditional colors of the royal bloodline. Wolves traveled from every corner of the kingdom, some walking for weeks to witness history. The ceremony would take place in the ancient temple at the heart of the city, a structure older than the castle itself. It had been abandoned during the council's reign, deemed too connected to the old ways they'd tried to erase. Now it stood cleansed and restored, its white marble walls gleaming in preparation. On the morning of the coronation, servants came to prepare Elira. They dressed her in robes of pure white silk, so light they seemed woven from moonbeams. Her hair was left loose, cascading down her back in waves. But woven through it were threads of silver and small white flowers that released a delicate fragrance. Around her neck, they placed a collar of silver filigree, set with moonstones that caught the light and reflected it in rainbow patterns. When Elira looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. Gone was every trace of the servant, the rejected Omega, the girl who'd believed herself broken. In her place stood a queen, regal and powerful and beautiful, in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance, and everything to do with inner strength, finally allowed to shine. A knock at the door announced Dane's arrival. The old commander looked resplendent in formal armor, polished until it gleamed. "My queen," he said, bowing deeply. "The procession is ready. The people wait." Elira took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The procession from the castle to the temple took an hour. Elira walked surrounded by guards with Dane at her side, and representatives from every loyal pack following behind. The streets were lined with citizens, thousands of them, all straining for a glimpse of their queen. Some threw flowers, others simply stared in awe. Elira heard whispers as she passed. "The White Wolf, the queen's bloodline. She's real. She's actually real." Children watched with wide eyes, and Elira made sure to smile at them, to acknowledge their presence. These were the wolves who would inherit whatever kingdom she and Kale built. They deserved to see that their queen cared about them. The temple loomed ahead, its massive doors thrown open, revealing an interior lit by thousands of candles. The space was packed, every available spot filled with witnesses, nobles in their finery, common citizens in their best clothes, warriors in formal armor. All had come to witness this moment. Kale waited at the altar, and the sight of him stole Elira's breath. He wore robes of midnight blue, so dark they appeared black except where candlelight caught the fabric and revealed deep sapphire undertones. Silver thread traced patterns across the material, ancient symbols of power and protection. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing the strong lines of his face, the scar that marked him as a warrior. Around his neck, he wore a collar that matched Elira's, silver and moonstone that proclaimed their bond. Their eyes met across the crowded temple, and the mate bond flared so brightly that Elira gasped. 10 days of separation, 10 days of hunger and need and forced distance, all came crashing back in a wave of desire so intense it was nearly painful. Sage stood at the altar between them, ancient and wise, power radiating from her weathered frame. "Approach," she commanded, and her voice carried throughout the temple despite her age. Elira walked forward slowly, aware of every eye on her. When she reached the altar, Kale extended his hand. The moment their skin touched, electricity arced between them, visible to everyone present. Gasps rippled through the crowd. "The moon goddess bears witness," Sage intoned, raising her arms, "as she has borne witness to every true king and queen throughout the ages. Let those who would challenge this union speak now or forever hold silent. Silence, complete and absolute. Even those who might harbor doubts about their rule weren't foolish enough to challenge the moon goddess's chosen. Then we proceed," Sage said. She turned to Kale first. "Kale Stormborn, last of the king's bloodline, do you swear to rule with justice and mercy? To protect the weak, honor the strong, and serve your people before yourself? Do you accept the burden of the crown and all it demands?" Kale's voice rang clear and strong. "I do so swear, by moon and star, by earth and sky. I accept this burden and will bear it until death claims me, or the kingdom no longer needs me. Sage nodded, then turned to Elira. Elira, last of the queen's bloodline, do you swear to rule with wisdom and compassion? To heal the wounded, guide the lost, and stand as shield for those who cannot protect themselves? Do you accept the burden of the crown and all it demands? Elira felt the weight of thousands of eyes, the expectations of an entire kingdom. But more than that, she felt the rightness of this moment. I do so swear, by moon and star, by earth and sky. I accept this burden and will bear it until death claims me, or the kingdom no longer needs me. Then receive the blessing of ages, Sage said. 2 attendants approached, carrying crowns on velvet cushions. The crowns were ancient, forged in an age when magic and metal were one. Kale's was heavy gold, set with dark sapphires that seemed to hold captured starlight. Elira's was lighter, crafted from silver and set with moonstones that glowed with inner fire. Sage took Kale's crown first, holding it high. By the power vested in me by the moon goddess, by the authority of the old laws, I crown you Kale Stormborn, Alpha King of these lands, protector of the realm, servant of the people. May your reign be long, and your justice swift. She placed the crown on his head, and power exploded through the temple. Kale's eyes flared bright silver, his alpha presence radiating outward until every wolf in the building felt the weight of their true king's authority. Some gasped, others wept. All bowed their heads in recognition. Then Sage turned to Elira, taking up the silver crown. By the power vested in me by the moon goddess, by the authority of the old laws, I crown you Elira, lunar queen of these lands, heart of the realm, mother of the people. May your reign be long, and your mercy boundless. The crown settled on Elira's head, and something within her awakened fully for the first time. Not just her wolf, though that rose up howling in triumph, but something deeper, older, the accumulated power of every queen who'd worn this crown before her. She felt their strength flowing into her, their wisdom, their determination. She wasn't alone in this. She carried the legacy of centuries. The temple erupted in light, silver and gold intertwining, spiraling upward to the domed ceiling. The moon goddess's blessing made manifest, visible proof that these were her chosen rulers. Let the bond be sealed, Sage announced. This was the final part of the ritual, the public claiming that would bind Kale and Elira, not just to each other, but to the kingdom itself. Kyle pulled Elira close, his hand cupping the back of her neck, his forehead pressing against hers. My queen, he whispered, for her ears alone. My mate, my heart, my king. Elira replied, tears streaming down her face. My mate, my soul. He marked her then, his teeth finding the spot on her neck where he'd bitten her before. But this time was different. This time, the mark glowed with silver light, visible to everyone, a permanent symbol of their bond. Elira marked him in return, her smaller teeth finding his neck, and when her mark blazed gold, the crowd roared their approval. The mate bond, already strong, became something more. It expanded outward, encompassing not just the two of them but the entire kingdom. Every wolf present felt it, a connection to their rulers that ran deeper than loyalty or law. This was pack bond, on a scale never before attempted, tying monarchs to subjects in a way that meant their fates were truly intertwined. Kale and Elira would feel their people's pain, their joy, their needs, and the people would feel their rulers' dedication, their love for the kingdom, their commitment to service. It was intimate and overwhelming, and absolutely right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sage spoke the final words. By moon and star, by crown and bond, I present to you your true rulers. King Kale and Queen Elira, chosen by the goddess, blessed by the people, united in purpose. Long may they reign. Long may they reign. The crowd took up the chant, voices rising until the temple shook with sound. Long may they reign. The feast that followed lasted 3 days. The castle's great hall had been transformed, every surface draped in silver and gold, tables groaning under the weight of food prepared by cooks who'd worked for weeks. Musicians played ancient songs, celebrating the return of the true bloodline. Dancers performed traditional dances that hadn't been seen in 2 centuries. Elira and Kale sat at the high table, wearing their crowns, acknowledging well-wishers and accepting oaths of fealty from nobles who'd been too afraid to reveal their loyalty before. Some were genuine. Others were clearly opportunistic, switching sides now that the council had fallen. Kale accepted them all with measured grace, though Elira could feel his skepticism through their bond. On the 3rd night, as the festivities finally wound down, Kale pulled Elira away from the crowd. They slipped through hidden passages to the royal chambers, finally, blissfully alone. "We did it," Elira said, removing her crown with relief. The thing was heavier than it looked. "We're just beginning," Kale corrected, removing his own crown and setting it beside hers. "The coronation was ceremony. Now comes the real work of ruling." "I know," Elira said, "and I'm terrified." "So am I," Kyle admitted, pulling her into his arms. "But we face it together. Equal partners, remember?" "Equal partners," Elira agreed, tilting her face up for a kiss. The kiss was gentle at first, a reaffirmation of their bond. But it quickly deepened, 10 days of separation and the intensity of the coronation ceremony fueling need that had been barely contained. They came together with desperate hunger, claiming and being claimed, the mate bond singing between them as they finally, properly consummated their union in the royal bed. Later, lying tangled in silk sheets, Elira traced the crown mark on Kale's chest, where the coronation magic had left its permanent seal. "What do you think the kingdom will look like in 10 years? 20? Stronger," Kale said without hesitation. "Healed. A place where being different doesn't mean being disposable. Where omegas are protected rather than discarded. Where justice means something again." He looked at her seriously. "Because we'll make it that way. Together." Elira smiled, pressing a kiss over his heart. Together. Outside their windows, the capital celebrated through the night. Inside, the king and queen held each other close and dreamed of the kingdom they would build from the ashes of tyranny. Chapter 8. Legacy of Light. 5 years had transformed the kingdom beyond recognition. Elira stood in what had once been the old tomb clearing, now a carefully tended memorial garden. White flowers bloomed year-round here, maintained by magic that Sage had woven into the soil. The tomb itself remained, but the seal was gone, replaced by an inscription in silver that read, "From darkness came light. From imprisonment came freedom. From despair came hope." She placed a hand on her swollen belly, 7 months pregnant with twins. The healers had confirmed it 5 months ago. 2 strong heartbeats, 2 alpha wolves already making their presence known. The kingdom had celebrated for weeks when the announcement was made. After 2 centuries of stolen rule and broken bloodlines, the legitimate royal line would continue. "You're supposed to be resting," Kyle's voice came from behind her, warm with affection and exasperation in equal measure. Elira turned to find her mate approaching, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples now, though he was still only 33 by the calendar. The stress of rebuilding a kingdom aged a man, even an alpha king. "I've been resting for months. I needed air." "Then let me at least keep you company," Kale said, settling beside her on the stone bench someone had placed near the memorial. His hand found her belly automatically, and she felt the twins respond to their father's touch, shifting and kicking. "They're restless," Elira observed. "Like their father. Or their mother," Kale countered. "You're the one who insisted on personally overseeing the new Omega Sanctuary yesterday, despite being heavily pregnant. Someone had to ensure it was done right," Elira said firmly. The Omega Sanctuaries were her personal project, safe houses scattered throughout the kingdom, where any Omega who felt unsafe or unwanted could find shelter, education, and protection. In 5 years, they'd established 23 such sanctuaries, and not a single Omega had been executed or abandoned since Kale and Elira took the throne. "I'm not arguing," Kale said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Just reminding you that you're allowed to rest occasionally." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun descend toward the horizon. In the distance, Elira could see the capital, its walls rebuilt, its streets prosperous. The poverty that had marked the council's reign was slowly being addressed through fair taxation, redistribution of hoarded wealth, and programs that provided work for those who needed it. Dine sent word from the eastern borders, Cale said after a while. The last of the council loyalists have been rooted out. 3 nobles who'd been harboring escaped guards. They're being brought to trial next month. How many does that make? Alira asked. In total, nearly 200 tried and sentenced over 5 years. Some executed for crimes that warranted it. Most imprisoned or stripped of titles and lands. Cale's expression was grave. Justice, but not revenge. That was always the line we swore not to cross. And we haven't, Alira assured him. Every trial was fair. Every sentence appropriate to the crime. That's what separates us from them. A messenger approached, bowing respectfully. Your Majesties, forgive the interruption. High Priestess Sage requests your presence at the temple. She says it's urgent but not dangerous. Kyle helped Alira to her feet, supporting her weight as they made their way to the horses. The journey back to the capital took an hour, and by the time they reached the temple, twilight had fallen. Sage waited in the inner sanctum, looking no older than she had 5 years ago despite her advanced age. Magic sustained her, and she'd told them once that she would live until her purpose was fulfilled. That purpose, apparently, involved guiding the kingdom's restoration. The moon goddess spoke to me in a vision, Sage said without preamble. The twins you carry are blessed. The boy will inherit his father's strength and strategic mind. The girl will inherit her mother's compassion and gift for healing. Together, they will rule even more justly than you have. Alira felt tears prick her eyes. They'll have the chance to grow up free, to choose their own paths. That's all I ever wanted. They'll have more than that, Sage said gently. They'll have parents who love them, a kingdom that values them, and a legacy of hope rather than fear. You've broken a cycle that had lasted generations, Alira. That's no small thing. Over the following weeks, the kingdom prepared for the birth with excitement that bordered on frenzy. Artists created paintings of the expected heirs. Musicians composed songs celebrating the new princes. Gifts arrived from every corner of the realm, from nobles and commoners alike. Alira gave birth on a night when the full moon hung heavy and bright overhead. The labor was long and difficult. Her body pushed to its limits, bringing 2 alpha wolves into the world. But Cale never left her side, his hand in hers, his voice steady as he talked her through each contraction. The boy came first, screaming his arrival with impressive lung capacity. He had his father's dark hair and his mother's amber eyes, a striking combination. They named him Aldrich, after Cale's father, who'd been murdered in the coup. The girl followed minutes later, quieter, but no less determined. She had silver-white hair like her mother and her father's storm-gray eyes. They named her Morena, after Alira's mother who'd died protecting her secret. When Sage placed the twins in Alira's arms, when she looked down at these 2 perfect, healthy children who would never know hunger or rejection or fear, she wept. Kyle wrapped his arms around all 3 of them, his own eyes wet. Our family, he whispered. Our future. The kingdom celebrated for a month. But as the festivities died down and life returned to normal, Alira found herself in the royal nursery late one night, watching her children sleep. Dane found her there, the old commander moving quietly despite his armor. My queen, you should rest. I will, Alira promised. I keep thinking about how different their lives will be from mine. They'll grow up knowing they're wanted, valued, loved. They'll never be called defective or worthless. They'll never have to prove they deserve to exist, because you and Kyle made sure of it, Diane said firmly. Every law you changed, every sanctuary you built, every omega you protected, it was all for this, so the next generation could grow up in a better world. It's not perfect yet, Alira said. There's still so much work to do. Wolves who cling to the old prejudices, regions where our reforms haven't reached, corruption that hides in shadows. But it's better, Dane pointed out. Measurably, demonstrably better than it was 5 years ago. And it will continue improving because you won't stop fighting for it. Neither of you will. He was right, Alira knew. This was the beginning, not the ending. The The coronation had been a ceremony. The battle against the council had been necessary. But the real work, the slow, difficult work of changing hearts and minds and systems, that would take decades. But looking at her sleeping children, at the peaceful kingdom visible through the window, at the mate bond that still sang between her and Kale even after 5 years, Illyra knew they would see it through. She'd gone from rejected Omega to crowned queen, from believing herself worthless to knowing she had value beyond measure, from dying alone in a forest to building a family and kingdom that would outlast her. The journey had been brutal. The cost had been high. But standing here, watching her children breathe, feeling the mate bond pulse with love and certainty, Illyra knew every moment of suffering had been worth it. The White Wolf and the Alpha King had reclaimed their throne. Now they would spend the rest of their lives proving they deserved to keep it. And someday, when Aldrich and Morena were old enough to understand, they would tell them the story, not a fairy tale, but the truth. How love and courage could break centuries of darkness. How even the most broken wolf could find her strength. How a curse meant to destroy them had instead forged them into something unbreakable. That was the legacy Illyra wanted to leave. Not just a restored kingdom, but proof that no matter how dark the night, dawn always came. And sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, you got to help paint the sky with light. The end.